Welcome, wrestling enthusiasts and connoisseurs, to the gripping stories of arrests and incarcerations outside the squared circle with our Wrestling Criminals Iceberg. Prepare to delve deep into the murky underworld of professional wrestling as we uncover the scandals, controversies, and legal troubles that have plagued some of the most iconic figures in the industry. From backstage brawls to real-life legal dramas, this video will take you on a roller coaster ride through the darker side of wrestling, revealing the shocking truths and hidden secrets lurking beneath the surface. This is the Wrestling Criminals Iceberg. Disclaimer: this video is for documentary and educational purposes only, and does not promote or endorse the actions of the individuals discussed. Viewer discretion is advised. And we're starting off at the tippity top of the iceberg, Tier 6, with our first entry on Tier 6 being Steve Austin. Stone Cold Steve Austin is one of the biggest names in the wrestling industry. Even though he's not the most decorated WWE superstar in history, his character and gimmick made him the biggest name in the industry during his prime. However, outside the ring, Austin hasn't always been a model citizen. In June of 2002, Austin's then-wife Deborah Marshall complained to the police after the rattlesnake reportedly beat her up at their home. Austin was arrested and was given 12 months probation and fined $1,000 along with being asked to carry out 80 hours of community service. Since Stone Cold was one of the biggest stars in the WWE at that time, Vince McMahon made Deborah sign a non-disclosure agreement so that she wouldn't let a story of abuse at the hands of Steve Austin come out to the public. This wasn't the last time that Austin was involved in a similar offense, as the police were once again called in March of 2004 after his then-girlfriend, Tess Broussard, complained that Austin allegedly assaulted her. No arrests were made this time around and no charges were filed in the case. Despite Austin's history of abuse against women, he still remains one of the biggest draws in WWE, even though he makes sporadic appearances and does not compete. And up next we have Booker T. Booker T might very well be the most successful African-American wrestler of all time, as the 5-time WCW champion has won all the big accolades not only in WCW, but also some of the big ones in WWE later on as well. However, not many know much about Booker's past and how well he has transformed from that phase, as he was involved in some very horrible crimes in his youth. Booker was part of numerous armed robberies in his youth and was arrested in 1987 when he tried to rob the Wendy's store that he was working at. Police suspected an inside job and arrested him and the other accomplices. Booker would serve 19 months in prison for this offense, and he was released on parole. Not many would expect Booker T to do such things, but luckily he found wrestling, and the rest was history. And up next we have Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant is one of the most recognizable and significant WWE stars of all time. He stood at a massive 7'4" and weighed 520 pounds, and he was a massive draw for WWE. However, he had his fair share of legal trouble, starting in the mid-1980s when Andre was involved in a confrontation with a group of rowdy fans at a hotel bar. Reportedly, one of the fans became aggressive towards Andre, leading to a scuffle. During the scuffle, Andre's patience wore thin and he ended up flipping over a car belonging to one of the fans. As a result, Andre was arrested for the incident. However, due to his immense size and status as a celebrity, the charges were eventually dropped. This wasn't the only time that Andre faced some legal troubles, as in 1989, he assaulted a cameraman. Apparently the cameraman was told before the match not to film Andre wrestling, and only his entrance. However, after the match, Andre thought that the cameraman had actually filmed the match, and he went berserk. He assaulted the cameraman and destroyed his camera. When police arrived at the scene, Andre refused to go with them, but he eventually complied on the condition that the police don't handcuff him. At the police station, he was then booked for assault and property damage. Andre was eventually found not guilty of assault, but he was fined $100 for criminal mischief and was made to pay $233 to the cameraman for the camera. The cameraman was roughed up pretty badly and ended up in a neck brace for a short time, though he recovered fully. And up next we have Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy is a multi-time world champion and he is mostly known for his time in WWE and TNA wrestling. The charismatic Enigma is known for his dangerous and high-risk maneuvers. Besides that, he is also known for his substance abuse problems and legal issues. On September 11, 2009, he was arrested on charges of trafficking controlled substances. After a search of his house, the police found 262 Vicodin prescription pills, 180 Soma prescription pills, 555 milliliters of anabolic steroids, and a residual amount of coke, as well as drug paraphernalia. Over a year later, the district attorney announced that Jeff would plead guilty to the charges, and in September of 2011, Hardy was sentenced to 10 days in jail and 30 months of probation and a fine of $100,000. Hardy would then get into legal trouble again in 2019 as he was arrested in South Carolina for public intoxication while he was on a hiatus from WWE due to injury. Just 3 months later, he was arrested again and charged while driving while impaired in North Carolina. His legal troubles didn't end there though, as in 2022, he was arrested in Florida on felony DUI charges and blew a 0.29 in a blood alcohol test, which is nearly 4 times the legal limit. Jeff Hardy was working for AEW at that time, and he was suspended and forced to go to alcohol rehabilitation. He returned to the company after a few months, but he was given 2 years probation and several other DUI-related sanctions. And up next we have MVP. MVP joined WWE in 2005 and had a different and interesting gimmick that made him a big name in the mid-card. However, MVP had a very rough childhood that could have torn his life apart. At the age of 12, he joined a street gang that left him in juvenile detention for 6 months after a robbery. Later on, he was made to serve a 9.5-year prison sentence after taking part in armed robberies and kidnappings. His original sentence was for 18 years, but he was released from jail early owing to good behavior. Thankfully, the WWE superstar saw light and rose above it all to join WWE and become a big name in the wrestling business. MVP, however, still has troubles traveling for work as he is banned from entering a few countries thanks to his criminal record. And up next we have Alberto Del Rio. Alberto Del Rio is a Mexican professional wrestler who is most known for his time in the WWE, where he became a multi-time world champion. After he left WWE, Del Rio's life took a turn for the worse, as on May 9, 2020, Del Rio was arrested for allegedly battering and SAing his girlfriend. Del Rio was accused of tying down his girlfriend with boxing hand wraps and SAing her for hours. Del Rio's now ex-girlfriend claimed that he smashed her phone and laptop and had even attempted to burn her passport to keep her from leaving. Del Rio was indicted on 1 count of aggravated kidnapping and 4 counts of SA by a grand jury in Texas. He was facing life imprisonment, but the charges were dropped about a year later. And up next we have New Jack. New Jack is easily one of the most violent and controversial wrestlers to ever lace up a pair of boots in this generation. Known for his time in ECW, where he would jump off of high things and take wrestling to the extreme, New Jack would sometimes take it too far. Like in one of the most infamous incidents in the history of professional wrestling, the mass transit incident, when New Jack brutally beat and bladed a 17-year-old Erich Kulas. New Jack ended up being arrested on assault and battery with a deadly weapon charges. However, the charges were thrown out of the window once the circumstances surrounding Kulas came to light during the trial. In the same year, New Jack was also arrested at a Smoky Mountain wrestling show after getting into an altercation with a 14-year-old boy and then fighting with police afterwards. New Jack also got arrested in October of 2004 when he was wrestling in Jacksonville, Florida, for the Thunder Wrestling Federation against a wrestler named William Jason Lane. During the match, New Jack seemed to inexplicably pull out a blade and begin to stab Lane repeatedly. The police arrived and arrested New Jack for aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. Lane agreed to drop the charges against New Jack in agreement for New Jack to train him and take him on the road with him. New Jack agreed, and as soon as the charges were dropped, he didn't hold up his side of the deal and immediately left Florida. And up next we have William Regal. William Regal is one of the greatest wrestlers to come out of the UK, and during his time in WCW, he got into some legal trouble. While on a flight from Japan to the United States, Regal got drunk on the flight and went to urinate, but did not shut the door behind him. A stewardess approached him to close the door, but Regal turned around at the wrong moment and ended up urinating on the stewardess. Regal claims that he was so drunk that he does not remember the incident and only remembers waking up in a cell in Alaska. At this time, Regal was dealing with a lot of substance abuse problems. Luckily, he got the help that he needed and is clean today. And up next we have Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar is one of the biggest names in the wrestling industry and has made his name in WWE as one of the most legit tough guys in the business. Lesnar signed with WWE in 2000, and a year later he was arrested by police in Louisville, Kentucky, as they suspected him of possessing a big amount of anabolic roids. However, the charges were dropped as it was found that the substances recovered were legal growth hormones and he was released with a clean slate. However, about a decade later in 2011, Lesnar was charged with hunting violations during a trip to Alberta in late 2010. Lesnar is known to be an avid hunter and his love for hunting got him in trouble. Lesnar pleaded guilty to a charge of improper tagging of an animal. This led to the Beast paying a fine of $1,700, and he was handed a 6-month hunting suspension for the offense. And up next we have Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and he made his name in WWE. While in WWE, he was battling addiction issues, but when he left the company, his addiction issues got worse. Kurt Angle then joined TNA, and in TNA, he became Perk Angle, putting his body on the line week after week in a drug-induced state. At the height of Kurt's addiction, he was taking 65 extra-strength Vicodin a day, and because there was such a prominent drinking culture in TNA, he started mixing alcohol with these pills. Throughout the years of Perk Angle while he was in TNA, he managed to get 4 DUIs in 5 years, and the last DUI that he got in Texas in 2013 convinced him to finally check himself into rehab and get to the root of all of his problems. He went for a 30-day stay in rehab, and since then he is clean and healthy. And up next we have Sunny. Sunny was a blonde bombshell who was one of WWE's biggest woman stars in the 1990s. She was insanely popular, and some considered her to be WWE's first diva. Her drug problems ultimately forced her out of the wrestling business, and her downfall from grace has been something that seems out of a movie, but it's actually real life. Sunny has a lengthy track record in crime, starting in 2012. This includes 5 arrests within a 4-week period where she was arrested for disorderly conduct, 3rd-degree burglary, and 3 counts of violating a protective order. Over the years, Sunny has had numerous arrests and incarcerations for driving under the influence. There has also been spells of imprisonment for a number of other crimes, like she was arrested for threatening to kill her partner with a pair of scissors. Then there was a time where she was accused of making terror threats in January of 2022. The list goes on and on. However, in March of 2022, she did something that will alter her life forever. While Sunny was driving under the influence of alcohol and marijuana, she slammed into the back of a 75-year-old's car, causing the man to die. She had a blood alcohol content of 0.28, which is 3.5 times more than the legal limit of 0.08 set by Florida law. She was also driving without a valid license. All of this caused Sunny to be sentenced to 17 years in prison for involvement in the deadly car crash that killed a 75-year-old. And before we head into the next tier of the iceberg, here's a word from today's sponsor, NordVPN. If you want to protect yourself online, browse without interruption, and control your private data, you should definitely get NordVPN. I've had NordVPN for quite a while now, and it's a game changer when it comes to doing anything on the internet. NordVPN is the most popular because it allows you to become safer with a single click, and its threat protection protects you from malware, trackers, and ads. By clicking the special Age of Wrestling link in the description, you'll be able to get a huge discount plus an extra 4 months free with every 2-year purchase plan. And the best part about all of this is that it's risk-free. NordVPN offers a 30-day money-back guarantee on all purchases. In wrestling terms, NordVPN is kind of like Bret the Hitman Hart, because it is the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. So if you want all of these awesome benefits, you should click the special Age of Wrestling link in the description. Thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. And now we're moving down the iceberg into the 5th tier, with our first entry on the 5th tier being Mike and Kerry Von Erich. Mike and Kerry Von Erich were members of the legendary and tragic Von Erich family that saw 5 of the 6 Von Erich boys die before their own father. Sadly, Mike Von Erich and Kerry Von Erich were 2 of those sons. We'll start with Mike, who was Kerry's younger brother. Mike didn't have an aptitude for sport like his older brothers, and he felt forced into being a wrestler because of his heritage. Things took a turn for the worse when Mike suffered a shoulder injury and had to get surgery to repair it. He developed what is known as toxic shock syndrome, which is a deadly infection, and this nearly killed him. While Mike survived the infection, he was never the same as he suffered brain damage due to all of this. All of this led Mike down a path of depression and self-destruction that culminated in him turning to drugs and alcohol as a stress reliever. And on April 11th, 1987, he was arrested in Texas on possession of a controlled substance and DUI charges. His arrest for possession of a controlled substance and DUI charges would push him over the edge. The following day that he was released from prison, he left an unaliving note for his family, and 4 days later, he was found dead next to Lake Atlas, having overdosed on sleeping pills and alcohol. The tragedy wouldn't end there though, as Mike's death would be a key contributor in Kerry Von Erich taking his own life. Kerry Von Erich was probably the Von Erich who had the most superstar potential, and he was even in WWE for a brief period, winning the Intercontinental Championship. But despite him having so much potential, he had major substance abuse problems, stemming from him having to get his foot amputated after an accident. He became addicted to painkillers and other heavy drugs. This led to 2 drug-related arrests. The first resulted in probation, and the second saw Kerry facing significant time in prison because of violating his probation. Instead of going to jail, Kerry returned home to his father's ranch and took his own life, firing one single bullet into his heart. And up next we have Matt Hardy. Matt Hardy is well known for coming up with some of the best characters and gimmicks throughout his career, and along with his brother Jeff, he has entertained wrestling audiences for over 2 decades. However, just like Jeff, Matt Hardy also had struggles with substance abuse issues. These issues landed him in trouble with the law, and he has multiple DUIs under his name. Apart from that, in 2014, Matt had a domestic dispute with his wife, Rebby Sky. While they were staying at a motel in Virginia, the two got into a physical fight where they beat each other up, which led to both of the parties getting a few bruises and cuts on their faces. According to the 911 call made, the operator was told that a female guest was being beaten up. The husband and wife pair were arrested by police and then later released. Thankfully, Matt Hardy has managed to mend his ties with his wife and is wrestling in AEW nowadays. And up next we have The Big Show. Throughout his wrestling career, The Big Show was an intimidating giant, but backstage, he was a big cuddly teddy bear that was very nice. But when The Big Show was in WCW and still getting the hang of wrestling, he committed some stupid crimes. In 1998, he was arrested for allegedly exposing himself to a hotel clerk, but was later released due to lack of evidence. He was again arrested the following year for apparently breaking the jaw of a guy during an altercation at a hotel. Despite not actually serving a jail sentence, not many would believe that The Big Show would actually be accused of doing such crimes. And up next we have Randy Orton. Randy Orton made his name in WWE and is one of the greatest heels of all time. But before he became a wrestler, he got into some legal trouble. When he was 18, he enlisted with the US Marines after graduating from high school. Randy Orton did not last long as part of the Marine Corps, as he was discharged after bad conduct in 1999. Orton was discharged for going AWOL on more than one occasion and for disobeying the order from a commanding officer. The Viper was tried by the Uniform Code of Military Justice and was convicted under a special court-martial. He was then forced to spend over a month in military prison. Orton then joined WWE in 2000 and ended up becoming a legend in the business. And up next we have Cash Wheeler. Cash Wheeler, formerly known as Dash Wilder in WWE, is one half of the most respected tag teams in wrestling today, FTR. In August of 2023, he was one half of the AEW World Tag Team Champions, and he was scheduled to go up against the Young Bucks at AEW's All in London in front of 70,000 fans, but then he got into some legal trouble. Cash Wheeler was arrested and booked into an Orange County jail for aggravated assault with a firearm. According to the police reports, this was a road rage incident where Wheeler allegedly flashed his gun at the victim. This put his match at AEW's All in London in jeopardy, but luckily everything was sorted in time and he was able to travel to the UK to perform at AEW's All In. And up next we have Nick Gage. Nick Gage was a Combat Zone wrestling icon and is a mainstay for Game Changer Wrestling, GCW. He has had his fair share of run-ins with the law though, as on December 22, 2010, Nick Gage walked into a bank in New Jersey and handed a robbery note to the teller. He got away with $3,000, but because banks have cameras and Gage didn't bother to use a mask, he was wanted the following week, as wrestling fans themselves contacted the police and helped them to identify Gage. Gage then went to Atlantic City trying to turn that $3,000 into $3 million. But when he discovered that the authorities were looking for him, he did the smart thing and turned himself in to the police, and Gage pled guilty to the reduced charge of second-degree robbery and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was eligible for parole in 2015 after serving 85% of his 5-year sentence, and so he was released, but he violated parole and was reincarcerated. He was then released again in November of 2016, and has stayed out of trouble with the law ever since. And up next we have Velveteen Dream. Velveteen Dream was one of the fastest rising stars in WWE in the late 2010s. His flamboyant swagger and magnetic aura led to many people believing that he was going to be the next big thing in WWE. He was released by WWE in 2021 though, after there was a huge scandal involving him being exposed for talking inappropriately and sending very inappropriate things to several male minors. After his release, his life spiraled out of control. Velveteen got arrested in 2022 after he was stopped by a police officer for having no headlights on. At this time, the Dream had coke in his possession, and while the cop was walking over to his car, the Dream sniffed up all the coke so that he wouldn't get arrested for coke possession. But the cop saw all of this go down and he was arrested for coke possession and destroying the evidence. His legal troubles didn't end there though, as soon after this happened, he got arrested for battery and trespassing. What happened here was that a gym employee asked the Dream to leave the gym so that he could clean up, but Velveteen refused and struck the gym employee, bit his chest, and threatened to kill him. Just 4 days after this arrest, he was arrested again for possession of drug paraphernalia. And up next we have Jake Roberts. Jake the Snake Roberts is known for being one of the most troubled souls in the wrestling business, having fought with addiction and substance abuse for most of his life. During the 1980s, Roberts had a series of run-ins with the law, mainly due to his drunken escapades. Over the years, he racked up quite a few DUIs and other impaired driving charges, and in 1999, he was arrested for owing over $20,000 in unpaid child support. Roberts was arrested again in 2004 for animal neglect due to leaving his iconic 15-foot python, Damien, abandoned in his garage, where the snake starved to death. Jake the Snake Roberts' life was a complete mess, and he was battling severe substance abuse problems. Thankfully, Diamond Dallas Page, who was trained by Jake Roberts, took his former mentor under his wing and moved him into his house. Jake the Snake made a miraculous recovery, dropped over 50 pounds, and remains sober to this day. And up next we have Tazz. Tazz is a wrestler most known for his time in ECW and his commentary positions that he has taken over the years in promotions like WWE and AEW. However, in 1998, Tazz got into some legal trouble. At this time, he was wrestling for ECW and he went to the Moon Beach tanning salon to get a tan. While there, he inexplicably asked a 15-year-old girl who was working at the salon to lift her shirt and show him her breasts. He then exposed his private parts to the girl in question. The police were called and they arrested Tazz. Tazz, however, couldn't pay the $10,000 bond and he was forced to sit in a jail cell. It's not known the outcome of this arrest, but seeing how he never missed any significant time out of his career in ECW in 1998 or 1999, one must conclude that he wasn't given a harsh sentence or was perhaps proven innocent of the charges. And up next we have Scott Hall. Scott Hall is one of the greatest wrestlers to never hold a world title. He was legendary in his role as Razor Ramon and was an integral part of the industry-changing New World Order alongside Hulk Hogan and Kevin Nash. Scott Hall's troubles with substance abuse have been well documented over the years. Scott Hall has been arrested many times over his career, but one of the most outlandish and notable arrests of his life was in 1999 when he was arrested for SAing a 56-year-old woman in a drunken stupor. In 2000, he was arrested in Florida for drinking and driving while over 3 times the legal limit. Scott Hall blew a 0.26 while the legal limit in Florida is 0.08. When they arrested him, he was going to pick up his children while driving the wrong way down a one-way street. And also in 2011, Hall was arrested when he got drunk and began to attack the patrons and waitresses at the Hitching Post Bar in Florida. He pushed a patron and cursed out the bartender. She called a ride for him, but when it arrived, he punched a window of the car and then pushed 2 women around. The police came and Hall resisted arrest, and because of all of this, he was sentenced to 10 days in the Seminole County Jail. And in 2011, he called his ex-wife while he was feeling like taking his own life. She would send EMTs over to his house and he would fight with them, and he was arrested because of this. Scott Hall's problems with substance abuse plagued him for the rest of his life, and in March of 2022, he sadly died at the age of 63. And up next we have Rob Van Dam. In 2006, Rob Van Dam was on fire, and at ECW's One Night Stand, RVD pinned John Cena and won the WWE Championship. 1 week later, Paul Heyman awarded RVD the ECW title as well, and so he became double champion. WWE had big plans for Rob Van Dam as his popularity was at an all-time high, but unfortunately this big push came to a screeching halt when Van Dam himself got in trouble with the law. RVD and Sabu were driving from Virginia to Philadelphia, and RVD was driving well above the speed limit. Van Dam was then pulled over by the police. In normal circumstances, you get a speeding ticket or a warning and you drive off. However, the police officer then caught the smell of pot and he searched the vehicle. The officer found 18 grams of marijuana, painkillers, and a few other drugs. Sabu and RVD were then arrested, and it came at the worst possible time for the latter. Vince McMahon was furious with this, and within weeks, RVD lost the WWE Championship to Edge, and on the very next day, he lost the ECW Championship to The Big Show. He was also handed a 30-day suspension. He returned after his suspension was over, but he never came close to the main event scene ever again. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 4, with our first entry on Tier 4 being Vader. Vader is a wrestler who is most known for his time in Japan and WCW, where he had won the WCW World Heavyweight title 3 times and the IWGP Heavyweight Championship 3 times. However, while he was working for the then WWF, he got into some legal trouble in Kuwait. In what was supposed to be a kayfabe moment, the Kuwaiti host of the program asked Vader if wrestling was fake. Vader flipped the table, grabbed the host by his tie and jerked him around while cursing at him and asking him if wrestling was fake. Vader believed it was supposed to be a work and was doing as he was instructed to do by Jerry Briscoe. Apparently, the host wasn't in on the act and Vader ended up being arrested and convicted of assault. Fortunately, he was let off with a $166 fine. And up next we have Ric Flair. Ric Flair is one of the most entertaining and successful wrestlers of all time, and his career has been illustrious. However, Flair has faced some legal trouble in the past, as on March 8, 1996, he handed over the keys of his car to the 20-year-old woman he was seeing at the time and let her drive while she was twice over the legal drinking limit. The legal drinking age at that time in North Carolina was 21. Ric Flair was arrested for giving alcohol to an underage girl and allowing her to drive. Not satisfied with one car-related arrest, Flair snapped in November of 2005 and choked a fellow commuter in a road rage incident. This time, Rick was arrested for assault and battery and damage to personal property. Both were misdemeanor charges, so he was let off with a slap on the wrist. And up next we have Doink the Clown. Doink the Clown was a wrestler in the 1990s in the WWF. His villainous clown character would frequently pull tricks on wrestlers at ringside and on fans as well. He had a short claim to fame in the WWE before getting released, and then he went on to wrestle for ECW and on the indie circuit. Doink the Clown, however, was a very disturbed man, as he was arrested various times and had a horrible criminal record for himself. He committed crimes like vandalism, harassment, criminal mischief, trespassing, disorderly conduct, as well as public drunkenness throughout his life, and had a criminal record which didn't allow him to get much work outside of the wrestling field. And up next we have the Sandman. The Sandman was a professional wrestler most known for his time in ECW. The Sandman was famous for his hardcore style entrance, where he would come to the ring with a Singapore cane and often a beer in hand, with Metallica's Enter Sandman playing in the background. However, after ECW folded, the Sandman faced some legal trouble. He was arrested in 2008 when he got drunk at a birthday party. A glass-throwing brawl broke out between the Sandman and the employees of the restaurant. The cut on the Sandman's head in his mugshot was caused by a glass bottle being broken on his head during the fight. The Sandman pled guilty to resisting arrest and he was fined $1,000, plus he had to pay a $200 court surcharge and was given a 1-year conditional discharge. And up next we have Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner was a genetic freak, most known for his time in WCW, WWE, and TNA. With arms like pythons, he entertained fans all over the world. However, when he was wrestling in WCW in 1998, Steiner got into an argument with a State Department of Transportation employee after the employee had informed him that an exit ramp was closed. Steiner threatened the employee before actually going on to hit him twice with his pickup truck, but thankfully the employee wasn't badly hurt. Steiner was later arrested and pleaded guilty for the crime, as he was made to serve 10 days in jail, while also being put under an 8-year probation order and having to pay a fine and do community service. And up next we have Haku. Older fans may remember him as Haku in the WWF, and younger fans may remember him as Meng in WCW. But one thing is for certain, the man known as Haku wasn't a character to be messed with, as he wasn't just a television tough guy, he was the real deal. So because he was such a tough guy in real life, he inevitably got into trouble with the law, with many times him getting arrested for fights. But the most notable was when Haku was arrested for a bar fight, and in this fight, Haku decided to take it a little further than the average bar fight, and he bit the man on the nose and bit it clean off. This story has been corroborated by other wrestlers. He was charged with assault in this case. King Haku would then follow up this act in 1989, where he insisted that a girl bow down in servitude to him as a king, and when the girl refused, her boyfriend stepped in, which angered Haku, and then he rammed her boyfriend's head into another man's head like bowling pins. He was again arrested for assault. And when Haku was wrestling in WCW in the 90s, he was at a bar with the Steiner brothers. The Steiner brothers got involved in a fight and Haku tried to break it up. When police arrived on the scene, they thought that Haku was the one who was fighting and so they arrested him. Being angry at his unjustified detainment, Haku fought off 8 police officers. The police officers maced him, and instead of giving a reaction like a normal person who would usually clutch their eyes hunched over, Haku just breathed it all in, broke his handcuffs, and went berserk on the 8 officers. The officers got him under control after some time, but he had to face several charges because of this incident. This story was corroborated by the Steiner brothers, and it just serves to show how much of a badass Haku was. And up next we have Billy Gunn. Billy Gunn is a professional wrestler who is most known for his time in WWE, where he was one half of the New Age Outlaws alongside Road Dogg Jesse James, and also for his time in D-Generation X. However, in 1990, just 1 year into Billy Gunn's wrestling career, he was arrested for disorderly conduct. Not much is known as to what happened here, but it wasn't the last time he was to get arrested, as he was arrested in 2005 on fraud charges. The arrest occurred after his initial release from WWE, and he allegedly defrauded a registered charity for his own profit. And up next we have Marty Jannetty. Marty Jannetty was a wrestler who had so much potential and is most known for his time in WWE, where he was one half of the popular tag team The Rockers alongside Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels turning on Marty Jannetty in a barbershop is one of the most iconic WWE segments of all time. And following this segment, the angle was red hot as fans were desperate to see Marty Jannetty get his revenge back as a babyface. But Marty Jannetty's poor decision making and personal issues provided as a setback, as just a few weeks after the barbershop segment aired on television, Marty Jannetty was arrested. He was charged with resisting arrest and possession of coke after police were called when Jannetty got physical with some security at a Tampa Bay nightclub. This led to Jannetty being suspended by the company while under house arrest. Because of all of this, the angle had to be delayed by months. Even though their feud had cooled off, Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels had a blow-off match at the 1993 Royal Rumble. But this match wasn't very good because there were allegations of Marty Jannetty being drunk or hungover during the contest. This led him to being fired very quickly after the match. And up next we have Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious stood at 6'9" and over 250 pounds, and he was most known for his time in WCW and WWE, where he became a world champion in both of those companies. In 2001, Sid suffered an injury that basically ended his career, and he was arrested about a decade later after he was stopped by police for not wearing a seatbelt. After stopping him, the police discovered a small amount of marijuana and found out that he did not have a driver's license. He was then released on a $1,000 bond. And up next we have Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik. Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik may have played bitter rivals on TV, but behind the scenes they were actually great friends who would travel together. They were intent on keeping their travels under wraps because a lot of the times they were facing each other at these events, and they couldn't be seen together in each other's company. However, they were only able to keep it a secret for so long, and when they were finally caught, the entire wrestling business was blown open for good. In May of 1987, Jim Duggan was driving himself and the Iron Sheik to an event in New Jersey when a state trooper caught Duggan drinking a beer while he was driving. He got pulled over and Duggan was open and honest to the officer. He told him that he had a small amount of weed in the car, which prompted the cop to search the vehicle and their bags. Unbeknownst to Duggan, the Iron Sheik had coke in his bags. They were both arrested, with Duggan getting let go quickly, but the Iron Sheik getting charged with a felony. The Iron Sheik was let go on bail, but the damage was already done as the story hit the airwaves. Back in 1987, kayfabe was alive and well, and these were the days that heels needed to leave arenas early to avoid mobs, received death threats, and needed protection. So it came as a huge shock when not just a face and a heel were traveling together, but they were also doing heavy drugs. WWE had to do something quick, and so the two were suspended and then fired. But it didn't really matter because the secret was blown open to wrestling fans. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 3, with our first entry on Tier 3 being Juventud Guerrera. Juventud Guerrera is a wrestler most known for his time in Mexico and his time in WCW in the 90s. However, diminutive luchadors like Juventud Guerrera were booked poorly by WCW. In 2000, when everything was falling apart for WCW, wrestlers on every card were frustrated, and Juventud Guerrera might have been the most frustrated of the bunch. While on a tour of Brisbane, Australia, Juventud got high on PCP, the drug, which is known to cause hallucinations, aggression, and dissociative dreamlike effects, caused Juventud to storm from his room butt naked and threaten to murder the WCW executives. The police were called in, and in a drugged out stupor, he began to assault the 3 police officers who eventually detained him. Juventud was arrested and charged with 2 counts of assaulting a police officer, 1 count of indecent exposure, 1 count of disorderly conduct, 1 count of causing bodily harm, and 1 count of possession of a dangerous drug. Brisbane authorities are nice people, and they let him off with only $1,800 in fines. However, the WCW executives were not nearly as nice, and they fired him immediately. And up next we have Nathan Jones. Nathan Jones is probably scarcely remembered by many due to his lack of years in the WWE, as he was only in the company for a couple of years as an intimidating heel who crushed over many. But before he was into the wrestling business or a strongman, Nathan Jones was actually a notorious criminal in his native country of Australia. He was a part of 8 armed robberies in Australia with his gang. During this time, he became one of Australia's most wanted men and was arrested and put into jail for a sentence of 16 years at the age of 18, but that was reduced when he was released in 1994. And up next we have Jim Neidhart. Jim the Anvil Neidhart was a professional wrestler best known for his time in WWE. Neidhart gained fame as one half of the tag team the Hart Foundation alongside Bret the Hitman Hart. However, after Neidhart's wrestling career, he got involved in some legal issues. Jim Neidhart was arrested during Labor Day weekend of 2010 when police allegedly found him in possession of 95 oxycodone pills and 28 methadone tablets. To make matters worse, some of the tablets had been reported stolen. He was charged with 6 felony counts, including 2 for possession, 2 for trafficking, 1 for burglary of an unoccupied dwelling, and 1 for third-degree grand theft. And up next we have Teddy Hart. Teddy Hart was a member of the famed Hart family, and at the time he signed with WWE, he was the youngest person ever to ink a developmental deal at 18 to train with Dory Funk Jr. But that head start didn't last long, with Hart being released before too long, allegedly due to attitude issues. He rejoined WWE on a developmental contract again, appearing for Ohio Valley Wrestling and then Florida Championship Wrestling, before being released again in late 2006. However, one thing was as bad as his attitude problems, and that was his legal record. He has a laundry list of allegations, arrests, and legal troubles, which include SA charges in 2014 that were later dropped. He also faced several charges like DUIs, evading arrest, and auto theft. In 2020, there was also a charge for possession of a Schedule III controlled substance with the intent to sell or distribute in Virginia. He also violated the house arrest condition in his bail, as well as facing charges of strangulation resulting in bodily harm. In 2023, he also faced charges of possession of MDMA, as well as possession of a controlled substance without a prescription. Yeah, Teddy Hart's rap sheet is very long. And up next we have Sean O'Haire. Sean O'Haire was a professional wrestler who competed in WCW and WWE. He was most known for his imposing physique, martial arts background, and unique persona. However, after his wrestling career, O'Haire faced some legal troubles. In June of 2004, he was arrested and charged with multiple counts of assault after a brawl at a Hilton Head nightclub in which he was accused of striking 2 women. He was later convicted of 1 assault in 2006. But then in 2007, he was charged with aggravated assault and battery for a fight. And then in 2009, he was arrested for beating up his then girlfriend. He was charged with domestic battery and criminal trespassing before being released on a $4,600 bail. O'Haire was clearly facing a lot of demons, and in September of 2014, O'Haire took his own life at 43 years old. And up next we have Disco Inferno. Disco Inferno was a professional wrestler best known for his time in WCW during the 1990s. Disco Inferno was a flamboyant and entertaining persona inspired by disco culture. After Inferno's wrestling career, he was arrested alongside 26 others in a gambling sting at his friend's house in the Atlanta area. Him and his friend constructed a casino in the basement of his home, complete with waitresses, and were holding regular high-stakes games where you couldn't even sit down at the table without a bare minimum buy-in of $10,000. Disco Inferno and his friend were both charged with felony gambling as well as drug possession, as coke and E were also seized during the raid. Disco was allowed to go free after posting a $10,000 bond. And up next we have the Dibiase family. The Dibiase family is a notable wrestling family with a rich history in the wrestling industry. The patriarch of the family is the $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase Sr., who had a highly successful career in the 1970s and 80s. Ted Dibiase Sr.'s sons, Ted Dibiase Jr. and Bret Dibiase, both pursued careers in professional wrestling, with Ted Dibiase Jr. having a successful stint in WWE. However, the family have been involved in some very shady dealings. In 2022, the Mississippi Department of Human Services sued Ted Dibiase Sr., Ted Dibiase Jr., and Bret Dibiase, and several other people to recover more than $20 million in money squandered from the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Anti-Poverty Program. So basically, the Dibiase family was stealing money that was supposed to go to poor families in the Mississippi area. Between 2017 and 2019, Ted DiBiase's companies received more than $3 million from this anti-poverty fund, and Ted DiBiase Sr. and Brett DiBiase also received significant amounts of money from this fund. Senior, Junior, and Brett are all facing different charges because they were involved in the scheme to varying degrees, but the most significant charges are lobbied towards Junior, who is facing 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, 6 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of theft concerning programs receiving federal funds, and 4 counts of money laundering. This case is ongoing and is very complicated, but in the worst case scenario, if they give Ted DiBiase Jr. the maximum sentencing for all of his offenses, he could be sentenced to over 100 years in prison. So he's in big trouble. And up next we have Buff Bagwell. Buff Bagwell was a successful mid-carder in the premier days of WCW at the height of the NWO in the late 90s and the turn of the millennium. One thing Buff was known for was his lack of professionalism when the cameras weren't running. The most extreme example of this saw Buff Bagwell being arrested for assault at a WCW Thunder taping in May of 2000. A black stage crew member was trying to exit the arena when Buff and a group of wrestlers were clogging the exit. When the stage crew member asked to get by, Buff Bagwell called him a derogatory slur twice and punched him in the face. When police arrived, they were shown photographs of the injury and given eyewitness testimonies of what happened. The police determined that Buff Bagwell was at fault and he was immediately arrested for assault. He would then be suspended by WCW for a whopping 30 days. And up next we have Ken Patera and Mr. Saito. Ken Patera and Mr. Saito were once big stars in the World Wrestling Federation, and in 1984, while they were traveling together, they visited a McDonald's in Wisconsin. Because it was after hours, they were denied service at the restaurant chain, and Ken Patera proceeded to throw a boulder through one of the windows. Ken Patera and Mr. Saito left the scene and returned back to their hotel. Then 2 police officers showed up at Patera's door. An altercation ensued between the 2 officers and the 2 wrestlers, and Patera and Mr. Saito were then arrested. Patera and Mr. Saito were then sentenced to 2 years in prison for battery of a police officer. They both spent only 18 months in prison owing to good behavior. And up next we have Jimmy Snuka. In the 1980s, Superfly Jimmy Snuka was one of the top babyfaces in the WWF. In 1983, Snuka was dating Nancy Argentino, even though he had a wife. Argentino and Snuka stayed in a motel room when WWF was in Pennsylvania. After the WWF Pennsylvania television taping, when Snuka arrived at his motel, he placed a call for an ambulance for his girlfriend, Nancy. When emergency personnel arrived at his room, she was then transported to the hospital, and there she was pronounced dead. The coroner's report stated that Argentino died of a traumatic brain injury consistent with a moving head striking a stationary object. Autopsy findings show Argentino had more than 24 cuts and bruises all over her body, and the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy wrote at the time that the case should be investigated as a homicide. Snuka was the prime suspect in this case. Just 3 weeks after Nancy's death, the case went cold after prosecutors met with Jimmy Snuka and the World Wrestling Federation's Vince McMahon in the district attorney's office law library. There's no record of what was talked about during this meeting, but in Jimmy Snuka's autobiography, he revealed that Vince McMahon had a briefcase filled with money. He then goes on to say that he doesn't remember if the money was given to the family of Nancy Argentino, but he still reiterated that he did not hurt her. The revelations that he revealed in his autobiography led to police looking into the case again, and in September of 2015, 32 years after the incident, Snuka was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter for Argentino's death. However, the case was dismissed because Snuka was mentally unfit to stand trial, considering that he had dementia and was battling stomach cancer. 2 weeks after the case was dismissed, he died at the age of 73 in Florida. And now we're moving down the iceberg into Tier 2, with our first entry on Tier 2 being Lex Luger. Miss Elizabeth's most famous relationship was with the Macho Man Randy Savage, but not many people know that towards the end of her life, she was actually dating Lex Luger, and these two were clearly not for each other, as the basis of their relationship was pills, alcohol, and lots of fighting. Luger was even arrested for beating up Elizabeth while they were both messed up on pills and alcohol, giving her 2 black eyes, a bump on the head, and a busted lip. Luger was released on bail, but less than 2 weeks after this incident, Miss Elizabeth overdosed while she was with Lex Luger and died. Fans found this suspicious, and they came up with a conspiracy theory that something more sinister was at play, and Luger was actually the one behind Elizabeth's death. And up next we have Nicole Bass. Some wrestling fans might remember Nicole Bass from the waning days of ECW, but most will probably remember her for a brief stint in WWF for a couple of months as Sable's bodyguard and Val Venus's sidekick. She eventually left WWE and left wrestling altogether, but she ran into some trouble with the law. On May 30, 2005, Nicole Bass had gotten seriously drunk due to the fact that she couldn't fill her prescription for oxycodone to help with the pain she was suffering from pancreatitis. She was using alcohol to medicate. This was a horrible idea, as she then wanted to take her own life and slit her wrists in front of her husband. Her husband then decided to call the police to help his ailing wife, and then she began to beat him up until he went cowering into a corner. Her husband was 57 years old at the time, and Nicole was 40 and still in very good shape. So yes, domestic violence against men does happen. When the police arrived and tried to save Nicole's husband, Nicole ended up biting the police officer's hand. She was arrested and then later transported to a psychiatric ward, and she was released after 72 hours. And up next we have Dick Slater. Dick Slater was a popular wrestler in the NWA territories, especially in Georgia, where he was a 4-time NWA Georgia Heavyweight Champion. His career spanned through the 70s to the mid-90s before he blew out 2 vertebrae in his back during a match, thus ending his career. After his career ended, he got in trouble with the law, as in 2003, Slater went to the house of his ex-girlfriend. The couple had just broken up, and his ex-girlfriend was allowing Slater to come to her house to gather his belongings there. While there, Slater suddenly attacked his ex with a punch to the back of her head. He then took a butcher knife and stabbed her 3 times in the back, arm, and leg. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder. Slater blamed the attack on morphine and oxycodone that he had taken the night before for his back. He said he had no recollection of attacking her, and on June 10, 2004, he was convicted for the crime and sentenced to 1 year of house arrest, 2 years probation, ordered to stay away from his ex-girlfriend, and forced to pay her $18,000 in restitution. Showing why attempted murderers should probably get more than 1 year of house arrest, Dick Slater was arrested again in 2007 for harassing his ex-girlfriend again. He made phone calls to her and left an envelope full of bank statements at her front door. He again blamed it on the drugs and said that he couldn't remember doing anything. And up next we have Art Barr. Art Barr was an American professional wrestler who found his greatest success in Mexico's AAA promotion, and he was not the man who invented the frog splash, but he was the one who brought the popularity of the frog splash to a wider audience in USA. In 1989, Art Barr raped a 19-year-old girl after a wrestling event. Under polygraph, Barr admitted that the girl did not consent to fornicate with him, but insisted that he believed that she would have had they been in a different location. Art Barr worked a plea bargain and was convicted of first-degree SA and fined a mere $1,000 and sentenced to a paltry 180 hours of community service. After this whole ordeal, Art Barr had a hard time finding work until WCW hired him, but WCW tried to hide his true identity under the makeup and powder wig of the Juicer character, which was a blatant Beetlejuice ripoff. This was in the days before the internet, so Art Barr's identity and crime were relatively unknown to a majority of fans, so WCW avoided controversy until years after Barr no longer worked for the company. In 1994, he died of a drug-induced heart attack. He was fondly remembered by his best friend Eddie Guerrero though, as when he died in 1994, Eddie Guerrero adopted the frog splash as a tribute to his departed friend. And up next we have Johnny K-9. Johnny K-9 was a Canadian professional wrestler who debuted in Stampede Wrestling, and he later defeated Jerry the King Lawler for the AWA heavyweight title. He then went on to wrestle for the WWF, New Japan Pro Wrestling, FMW, and SMW before retiring in the mid-90s. Johnny K-9 is more infamous for what he did outside the ring than inside one. He was the president of the Satan's Choice biker gang in Ontario, Canada, and was arrested in the early 90s for trafficking coke and sentenced to 10 months in prison. Right after that, he was arrested again for assault and sentenced to 7 months in prison. He then got released, and after he and several friends were ejected from a strip club for wearing their gang colors, Johnny K-9 and his friends decided to get revenge by blowing up the club. Realizing such an event would incur the wrath of local police, they decided it would be more prudent to simply blow up the police station instead. And so Johnny K-9 and his friends blew up a police station. Inexplicably, he was only sentenced to 33 months in prison, even though an officer got hurt during the bombing and it could have ended very catastrophic. By the time that Johnny K-9 got out in 2000, he was already under investigation for being the mastermind behind the 1998 murder of a lawyer and her husband. He was accused of orchestrating their murder from behind bars, but he was fortuitously acquitted. His despicable rap sheet wouldn't end there though, as in 2009, he was arrested with 7 other members of a new gang that he was a part of called the United Nations Gang, and they were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, planning to take the lives of multiple members of a rival gang. This didn't really go anywhere though, but in 2013 he was arrested again for murder, and he was sentenced to 13 years in prison. He only served 3 before being released to live in a halfway house where he died in 2017. And up next we have Black Ninja. Not to be confused with Super Black Ninja, who is actually the Great Muta. Black Ninja is a former Puerto Rican wrestler who used to wrestle for the World Wrestling Council promotion in Puerto Rico. In 1997, Black Ninja was arrested for graping his underage stepdaughter. Not much information is given on what occurred after his arrest, but if he was convicted, the average term for grape in Puerto Rico is 12 years. Add to the fact that she was still a minor, and he could be serving the rest of his life in prison, and deservedly so. And up next we have Blackjack Mulligan. Blackjack Mulligan, better known as Robert Jack Wyndham, is the patriarch of the Wyndham wrestling family that includes his sons Barry Wyndham and Kendall Wyndham, and his grandsons Bray Wyatt and Bo Dallas. Blackjack Mulligan was a dominant force in the NWA promotions in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. After Blackjack retired from the ring, he found himself on the wrong side of the law in 1990. Blackjack was arrested by the US Secret Service and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for counterfeiting. When he was arrested, the authorities had found $500,000 in counterfeit bills in the bust. He and several attorneys were all hit with federal indictments, but the worst part was, he had also gotten his own son, Kendall Wyndham, involved in the scheme and dragged him down as well. Both Blackjack Mulligan and his son Kendall Wyndham signed plea agreements and were given 24 months in federal prison. And up next we have Ludwig Borger. Ludwig Borger was a Finnish professional wrestler, actor, author, and politician. He gained prominence in the wrestling world during the 1990s, particularly in the WWE, where he was known for his imposing presence and villainous persona. After Ludwig Borger left wrestling, his career went in several different directions, but his most notable was when he became a politician. Ludwig Borger was successful in politics in his native country of Finland, where he was admitted to Finland's parliament in March of 2003. But just 4 months after being elected to parliament, everything unraveled when Borger combined heavy drinking with taking massive quantities of amphetamines. While Borger was drunk in his home with his wife, they began an argument that would last early into the morning, and around 7 AM they were still arguing when Borger pulled out a pistol and fired it at his wife. Luckily, the bullet didn't hit his wife. After the gunshot, their argument escalated and neighbors called the police, and they surrounded the couple's apartment. There was a standoff and police could only enter the home at 10 AM, and the police immediately called an ambulance to haul Borger away to a hospital. Borger would slip into a coma that would last 3 weeks. He suffered permanent brain damage due to a lack of oxygen from the amphetamine and alcohol overdose. While raiding Borger's house, they found a gun, ammunition, and thousands of pills and vials of drugs, including anabolic roids. When Borger came to, he was charged with several different crimes, including the illegal possession of imported drugs, amphetamine usage, and owning an unlicensed pistol. Borger was sentenced to 4 months in prison despite being a parliament member. Ludwig Borger was facing some pretty serious demons, and on January 8, 2010, Ludwig Borger took his own life at 47 years old. And up next we have La Tigresa. La Tigresa, which in English is the Tigress, was a popular women's wrestler in Puerto Rico. She wrestled for the World Wrestling Council, and she was a 3-time women's champion in the promotion, with her third reign lasting for 5 years, ending in 1998. That reign would have been much longer, but she was forced to vacate the championship because she was arrested for smuggling heroin into the Puerto Rico State Penitentiary. She was caught after attempting to sell heroin to an undercover agent. The Tigress was not arrested alone though, as her longtime boyfriend was also arrested, and their bail was set at $75,000. No word came on the outcome of her arrest, but because Puerto Rico is part of the United States as an unincorporated territory, there's a good chance they have similar sentencing guidelines, which means that the Tigress and her boyfriend were facing 15 years to life in prison if convicted. And up next we have Invader 1. Jose Gonzalez, better known as Invader 1, was a Puerto Rican wrestler who wrestled in the United States and around the world, but especially in Puerto Rico. He is most famous for taking the life of Bruiser Brody. Bruiser Brody was a 6'8" bearded mountain of a man who was a legend of his time. He was a name popular across the world, particularly in Japan, and his worldwide fame brought him to Puerto Rico, where he wrestled Invader 1. In this match, Brody worked a little bit too stiff and beat the crap out of Invader 1, essentially burying him in the eyes of his home Puerto Rican fans. While Invader 1 was in the hospital after the Brody match, he was noted as saying that one day he's gonna kill Brody. And in 1988 in Puerto Rico, when Brody was in the locker room before his scheduled match, Invader 1 asked Brody to step into the shower area to discuss business. There was an argument between the two wrestlers and a scuffle ensued. Due to the design of the dressing room, there were no witnesses to what happened in the showers between Bruiser Brody and Invader 1. However, there were 2 screams heard, and they were loud enough for the entire dressing room to hear. Tony Atlas was the first man to enter the scene, and he saw Brody bent over holding his stomach and Invader 1 holding a knife. Brody would die later that night from his stab wounds. Invader 1 was charged with murder, but he pleaded self-defense. Back in the 80s, kayfabe was very much alive, so he convinced the jury that Brody's gimmick as a madman was actually how he was in real life. The Puerto Rican jury bought into this, and he was found innocent, thus acquitting him from the murder of Bruiser Brody. What also was very suspicious during this whole ordeal was that Tony Atlas and Dutch Mantel were supposed to be summoned for the trial because they were witnesses of the aftermath, but they only got their invitation to the trial after it had taken place. Invader 1 was able to literally get away with murder. And now we're moving on to the deepest and darkest part of the iceberg, Tier 1, with our first entry on Tier 1 being Buck Zumhofe. Rock and Roll Buck Zumhofe was a staple in 1980s AWA, and he was the second ever AWA light heavyweight champion. In 1986, he was arrested and found guilty of misconduct with a minor. After he was a confirmed predator, he went back to wrestle for AWA. His predatory behavior didn't stop there though, as in 1989, he was sentenced to 36 months in prison after being convicted of 4th degree misconduct with a minor. He spent his time in prison and was ultimately released and went back to wrestling like nothing had happened. Even after the fact that he was a 2-time convicted sex offender, WWE hired him on several different occasions, even wrestling against The Undertaker one time. All of this is just scratching the surface though, because his story gets even worse. He was arrested again in 2013 when he was charged with 12 felony counts of criminal misconduct after he SA'd his very own daughter for 12 years between 1999 and 2011. He was convicted on all 12 counts, and after the verdict, he tried to flee from the courthouse, but officers stopped him, and he was additionally charged with trying to escape from custody. He was officially sentenced to 25 years in prison. And up next we have Andre Hart. Andre Hart was an independent wrestler from the Ohio area, and he went under the aliases Gangsta of Love and Sweet Sexy Sensation. He was building his name on the independent circuit, and then in 2009 he got an offer to be a referee at WWE, but then when they did a medical check on Hart before he was to get hired, they found out that he had HIV. And so they rescinded the contract. He then disappeared for months and then showed back up in Cincinnati and said his contract from WWE was pulled because he had felonies relating to child support. Andre Hart continued as usual, and he wrestled in promotions like World Wrestling Coalition and Unstoppable Wrestling Alliance while he had HIV. Some of his matches were bloody, so he was bleeding on wrestlers even though he knew he was HIV positive. And then on April 13th, 2011, he was arrested by Cincinnati police for fornicating with someone in spite of the fact that he knew he was HIV positive since 2009. The following day, 2 additional women came forth to admit that Andre Davis had also had unprotected fornication with them, and he did not disclose the fact that he had HIV. More women came forward, and prosecutors said that he had unprotected fornication with more than a dozen women. Andre Hart told the judge that he was a fornication addict and that his addiction grew worse when he lost his dream of becoming a professional wrestler after getting his HIV test results. Hart also said that the woman that he had slept with had to bear some responsibility for choosing to engage in unprotected fornication with him. At the time of the trial, none of the women that he had unprotected fornication with or the men he wrestled against tested positive for HIV, but their status is unknown after the trial. Andre Hart got his justice served to him as he was sentenced to 32 years in prison. And up next we have Steve Gatorwolf. Steve Gatorwolf was a staple of WWF's early 80s job squad, alongside fellow light-staring luminaries Mike Sharp and Barry Horowitz. According to Bret Hart, Gatorwolf blew his only shot at the big time after forgetting to do a war dance spot, which had been intended to get his Native American character over. Gatorwolf would never get a second chance at the big time, and was released from WWE soon after. He got into legal trouble in 2001 when he was sentenced to 2 years in prison for aggravated battery. And over 10 years after he got out, he was arrested in 2014 at the age of 56. He was charged with 7 felony counts of SA against a 15-year-old girl who was the daughter of his friend. He allegedly raped the 15-year-old victim on at least 7 different occasions, dating back to when she was 14. The court documents say that Gator Wolf told the victim that he would commit if she told someone about him because he didn't want to go back to prison. The 15-year-old girl said that she was afraid to report the assault at first because she was scared to, but she eventually did. During his trial, Gator Wolf left threatening voice messages on the girl's phone that were played in court. This is a very serious situation, but Gator Wolf clearly wasn't taking it seriously because he defended himself in court in a third-person promo. Gator Wolf thought he was cutting a promo like he's The Rock or something while facing despicable charges like this. He was found guilty and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. And up next we have DT Porter. Brian McGee, most known by his wrestling name DT Porter, worked on the independents and signed a WWE developmental contract in 2010. His 6'7" build and athletic frame made him a hopeful for the main roster someday. Porter appeared on 2 WWE house shows before ultimately being released in 2012 without being called up. This crushed DT Porter and he spiraled into alcoholism. His life was going off the rails, and in the summer of 2013, Porter was seen by witnesses exiting his car at his girlfriend's apartment complex, and then taking a knife and then stabbing his girlfriend multiple times in the torso and neck, and then fled the scene. He then sadistically posted a picture of a dead body as his Facebook profile picture. A high-speed police chase ensued, resulting in DT Porter crashing his car and being apprehended. DT Porter was then charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. And up next we have James Brown. James Brown was a Scottish professional wrestler who wrestled on the British independent circuit in the 2000s. He competed under the names of James Wallace and Jay Phoenix. During his career, he appeared on the ITV dating show Take Me Out. However, in the span of just 2 years, he committed 4 lewd crimes involving children. Some of these arrests include being caught with CP and committing a lewd act at a public swimming pool where kids were around. In one of the cases, he approached 4 girls, aged 13 and 14, and made disgusting lewd comments toward them before following them down a street. One of the girls recognized Brown from his appearance on the ITV dating show Take Me Out. The teenagers were left terrified and scared by the incident, and they told their parents about the encounter, so it was reported to the police, who arrested Brown again. For the trauma that he brought to these girls, and considering all of his previous crimes, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. And when he got out, there would also be a court order preventing him from having any unsupervised contact with children. And up next we have Douglas Witten. Douglas Witten was an independent wrestler from Texas. During his wrestling career, he fell into alcoholism, and in order to try and get better, he moved to New Orleans for a fresh start. However, while there, he fell back into his old alcoholic ways and checked himself into rehab. After signing himself out of the facility, he would be homeless, but he would find work at a church. At this church, he met the Reeves family, which was a family of 4, and they invited him to stay at their house out of the kindness of their hearts, until he got back on his feet. Less than a week after he started staying at the Reeves family home, he brutally took the lives of the family of 4, with the youngest victim being a 9-year-old boy. The murder items were a knife and a blunt object similar to a brick or a rock. Witten went on the run for a little bit, but it wasn't long before the police caught him. He confessed to the murders, but he pleaded innocent to the charges because he claimed that he had blacked out and couldn't remember taking the lives of 4 innocent people. The judge did not believe his defense, and on February 26, 1999, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. And up next we have Bob Sweetin. Bob Sweetin was a journeyman wrestler who worked for many territories from the central US to the southwest. Sweetin was known for causing riots in arenas for his heel antics, and he was a massive influence for a young Shawn Michaels. Sweetin got involved in a life of drugs in the mid-1980s, and he had been having an affair with a fan who was also a drug dealer. This caused him to completely disappear from the lives of his wife and 4 children. He went missing for months, missing Thanksgiving, Christmas, and birthdays, and much more. He completely abandoned his wrestling career, and all he was doing at this time was doing drugs with his new girlfriend. He eventually was found and his wife divorced him, but in 1990, Sweetin was arrested for charges of SAing a child, and this child was his very own daughter, who was 15 years old at the time of the assault. Sweeten pleaded guilty to the SA of his daughter, but he didn't go to jail as there was a new program that required him to register as a sex offender, stay away from minors, and stay in touch with the authorities. And up next we have Hardbody Harrison. Hardbody Harrison was a wrestler who trained at the WCW power plant and debuted with WCW in 1995. Known chiefly for his physique and strange ring attire, Hardbody Harrison never moved above jobber status. Harrison's contract was not picked up after Vince McMahon and the WWF purchased WCW. He then subsequently retired from professional wrestling. However, somewhere along the way, things went wrong for the former WCW wrestler. In 2007, local and federal authorities discovered that Hardbody Harrison had been living with several females in a Georgia home as part of a fornication selling ring, and the 8 women there were being held against their will and were used as sex slaves. Hardbody's victims claimed that they were forced to complete a multitude of tasks and chores in addition to being pimped out to clubs, trailer parks, and parties, and were forced to have sex with up to 8 men at a time. In this case, Hardbody decided to act as his own lawyer, and he contended that the women were willingly living in his home because they wanted to train as professional wrestlers. He said many of them arrived on drugs and he was just trying to help them better their lives. Harrison was unable to convince anyone of his story and was instead sentenced to life imprisonment. And up next we have Bill Armstrong. In the 1990s, there was an independent wrestler named Handsome Bill Armstrong. He was not in any way related to the Armstrong family. He wrestled primarily in the independent promotions in the North Carolina area. In 1998, Armstrong was accused of raping a 10-year-old girl he knew over a 2-year period. When the word got out that there was a warrant for his arrest, Armstrong took off out of the state. He allegedly stole a van owned by one of the indie wrestling promotions he was working for. He was found hiding out in a tent in Jacksonville, Florida. He was arrested and charged with 2 counts of statutory rape, 2 counts of committing a statutory sex offense, and 2 counts of taking indecent liberties with a minor. And now we're at the bottom of the iceberg with our last entry being the Lady of Silence. Juana Barraza, known by her wrestling name, La Dama del Silencio, which in English translates to the Lady of Silence, was a Mexican professional wrestler who was most active in the 1980s. The Lady of Silence had a very rough upbringing. She was born in a rural area north of Mexico City. Her mother was an alcoholic who reportedly pimped her out to a man in exchange for 3 beers when she was a minor. Because of this, the Lady of Silence hated her mother. She then got into wrestling, as she worked as a popcorn vendor by day and a luchadora by night. But after she retired from the ring, her true nature came out, as she became a serial killer. Beginning in 2003, the Lady of Silence would gain entrance to the homes of elderly women by pretending to help carry in groceries, or claiming to be sent by the government for medical help. Once inside, she would pick a weapon, like a set of stockings or a telephone cord, and strangle them. Though the crimes didn't seem to be motivated by financial gain, she would often look through her victims' houses for something to take with her, as a sort of memorabilia. And over the next few years, the Lady of Silence killed almost 50 women before the police finally caught a break in the case. The Lady of Silence took the life of an 82-year-old woman with a stethoscope. After she was leaving the scene, the woman who was renting a room in the victim's home returned and found the body, and she immediately called the police. With the help of the witness, the police were able to arrest the Lady of Silence before she left the area. During questioning, the Lady of Silence confessed to having at least one woman, stating that she committed the crime out of a sense of anger at elderly women in general, and she explained that her hatred was rooted in feelings toward her own mother. With the evidence they collected, police were able to charge the Lady of Silence with 16 different murders, but she is believed to have killed up to 49 people. Though the Lady of Silence continued to claim that she had only been responsible for the one that she got caught for, she was convicted and sentenced to 759 years in prison. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please check out our other videos, and also please like, share, comment, and subscribe. But anyway, goodbye.